So good morning, St. Vinny's, housing and homelessness. Really lovely to work with you today. There's quite a few of you on the line, so I'll just wait until you all come through. But yes, today talking about a really, I think, important topic, particularly if you think around, coming through COVID, and that's just being an additional stress on all of you in the homelessness and housing sector, which is already, I think, quite a stressed environment. So we're going to talk a lot about different things today, but a warm welcome to all of you as always. And if I can just ask you to talk with me through the Q&A box, if you wouldn't mind, not through the chat box. And right now at this stage, I'm just going to ask any of you to just tell me whether you can see the screen and hear me. So if you could say yes and yes or no or whatever, then I know what I'm working with. Thank you very much, Caben. I think that's your name. That's a lovely name. Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Susie. Awesome to be with you here today, Vinny's. It's really great. I feel as if like you're my second family in a way. I've been working with Vinny's for that long. So, okay, super stressed. One of the things I definitely mentioned last time in the Keep Your Cool session was hopefully that, so many people, including all of you on the line, had the opportunity, really, I suppose, not only through COVID, but since COVID, to really kind of reflect on you, the way that you live, the way that you lead, the work that you do, all of those kind of things, so that, I guess it's to live and to hopefully look at the way that we're living and work out a way that's maybe less stressed or less anxious. Because I think when COVID arrived, we had obviously no idea what was going to happen. And I've been reading some research yesterday, actually, about some of the impacts of COVID on businesses moving forward, the not-for-profit sector. And obviously, it's got pretty scary because COVID brings with it a whole range of different problems and challenges, but also with it opportunities. Now, with opportunities comes stress at times, naturally, and also with challenges comes stress. So let's dive right into what you're doing. I'm really hoping that you are able to do the pre-work. The pre-work was pretty important, actually, because it's kind of getting you into the zone of not only stress, but considering what resilience really looks like. Now, there might be many things on today's session that you actually already know. Stress is something that is very particular, it's very unique, which we'll talk about today, although there's a lot of stress-reducing strategies that we may know, but we don't use, which is another thing we'll talk about. And then we're going to lead into resilience. So, okay, what are the outcomes that we have for today? Firstly, we're going to talk about stress. What is stress? The types of stress. Talk very briefly about fight and flight or flow. And then coping with stress and COVID-19. And then I'm going to swoop into resilience, talking about the definition of resilience, which I think is the one I have might be different to the one that you have. The 7 C's of resilience, studies around resilience. Excuse me, human ways of thinking, and that's a really important construct in the ability to be resilient, because it shows us that the more we are able to see and interpret the challenges that come our way every day in life in a more positive framework, in a more optimistic way of thinking, generally we tend to be more resilient. So we'll talk a little bit about those right now as I go into the session. Again, as usual, I try and make it as interactive as I can, as opposed to just going onto a webinar. So we've got a poll and we've got a really great little YouTube. I've got some questions for you and all those kind of things that maybe we can take a stop and think about. How stressed am I really? And if I am stressed, do I really think in a more stressed way or a more relaxed way? Or are there ways and strategies that I can do to actually do the stress thing a whole heap better? Okay, so now, this is an interesting thing, because what does the community sector face besides COVID-19? So I include this particular slide when I'm working with the not-for-profit people like you are. And I think it's a really important point, is that, for example, when I was talking about some people who are greatly affected by the NDIS, the NDIS and its onset and the aged care reform and all of those kind of things have brought huge change to the industry. And so, very much beforehand, you had a welfare kind of funding organization that's now, because of the onset of NDIS and aged care reform, now they're actually having to become more of the business model. And that's changed the way that providers are working. And it's actually important because it's actually made the financial situation of many providers very, very precarious. Maybe less so in the bigger providers like Vinnie's, but nobody is absolutely, completely secure in a changing world, a changing government, a changing environment. And we also know that some of the research tells us that more providers are operating a loss, up from 21% in 2016, which is pretty scary. And what we're seeing is mergers are a growing feature of the sector. Smaller players particularly are kind of bringing their buckets together, trying to get together, form a new organization, and that brings an immense amount of stress. And it doesn't always work either, particularly if there's no real kind of strategy around it, thinking it through, communicating with people, getting their people on board, all those things that so many organizations don't necessarily do well. I mean, it's a tough operating environment out there. I think in housing and homelessness, I mean, as I explained to you last time, I've got a really long background in working with women in shelters, a very long background in domestic violence, and that also then peaks into homelessness, etc. So it's a tough operating environment. I've been there, and I'm very much still connected to that sector. And I know how difficult it is for you at times. Your job is not easy. We often see that there's low levels of collaboration within the sector. So for example, you might have two, let's say, aged care service providers working in a similar kind of area. They're working against each other and they see it kind of dog eat dog. They don't see that by collaborating and working together and being really kind of great collaborative players in this industry, that maybe they could be a much bigger and better force with which to be reckoned. So if I'm taking, for example, your particular operation in Wagga Wagga, let's say in Deniliquin, right? Maybe it would be that even though you are providing the services you could also occasionally join with another service provider to really work with each other to provide greater outcomes ultimately for the client. The NDIS was premised on a robust ecosystem of service providers and collaborative service offerings, and it hasn't been able to do it. So because of this, there's been high staff turnover. The workforce challenges are still top of mind, where 63% find it difficult to recruit, for example, disability support workers. So we've got a lot of problem in the industry of recruiting the right people and also then retaining those people. And I'm sure you would have that experience. So there you go, over 70% said that recruiting talented health workers is increasing more difficult. Now that's health workers. I mean, I'm sure pretty similar in your particular area. So there's a lot of things there on the screen that we're facing, but hold on, that's not just all that you're facing. Now you all, I think, hopefully know me. For those of you who weren't on the line last time, my name is Karen Walsh. I'm a psychologist by training, been doing leadership development, team development coaching for many, many years in Africa, Fiji, and Australia. Love what I do, but not about me. Okay, so you'll see as we go through the series, ladies and gentlemen, that I often bring in the same slide. So this is one of them. And why I'm doing that is to kind of join the sessions together so that they almost come apart across to you as a combined mini series. And this is one of the slides that links them. But as a new world does dawn, what can we learn about ourselves, how we manage our stress, and what resilience we have had during COVID-19? And I know that a lot of people in the not-for-profit sector, because I work within the sector so often, there's a lot of stress in the sector right now. I know that. I'm told that by different organizations. There's so many things that people feel as if they're firefighting. I was speaking to a CEO yesterday, actually, of a disability service provider, and she said to me, the most important thing isn't necessarily COVID and all that brings with it, but more about the ongoing fatigue, the ongoing exhaustion of her people. She says they wake up exhausted, they go through the day exhausted, and they go to bed exhausted. And I know that there's one of the real difficulties we have in the sector, not for profit, across all of the different providers, is the sense of real burnout. Because for many of you, if not all of you in the sector, and most of you on the line today, you were still at the forefront during COVID. That didn't stop. You still had to get out there. You still had to provide the service that you were providing. And of course, you've got different issues around now when we talk about COVID. We've got a huge increase in mental health issue. We've got a huge spike in the incidence of domestic violence. This is a big problem. And it's really interesting to note, because with this, we've seen unprecedented global stress. Get this, you may have seen this 2 or 3 days ago. I was listening to the news, and there were another 358,000 cases of COVID overnight in India. Now, I know that there's 1.8 billion people living in that country, but how do you ever, if there's nearly 400,000 new cases overnight, how do you stop this thing? You know, it really hasn't slowed down in the States. And I would have loved to have been having this conversation with you today and saying, well, I'm so glad, guys, that COVID's gone. Let's get down to living. I don't think it's going to go for a long time. And I think, you know, obviously the vaccine is another issue that we have to cope with, because who gets it, who doesn't, who's available, who's not, all those kind of things. So we're living with unprecedented global stress. I talked last time about a completely different world, and it is. More and more people are working from home. That brings great undue disruption and stress to maybe some of the relationships at home that came out of COVID. You know, much more digitalization, massive changes in how we work. Maybe less so for you, ladies and gentlemen, although I presume there's probably a few more of you, or many more of you now, who are working from home. And that brings with it its own challenges, right? That's not necessarily easy. I find digital, you know, being a baby boomer, I find it very difficult, and I do the very best I can. But we're now a digitalized world. And what I was reading yesterday was that 65% of companies from around the world that were recently researched around the biggest challenges they face in the next 2 years was, number one, was becoming more digitalized and focusing their efforts on digitalization. And I think that was, you know, that's completely different to even as recently as 18 months ago. So many of my friends have always said to me, oh, it must be so fantastic to work from home. I wish we could. Well, COVID made them do so, you know, stop the world, you're working from home. But the problem is, a lot of them had to school their children at the same time. A lot of them had to deal with stresses of finance. A lot of them had to deal with aging parents, and a lot of things that people don't actually consider when they're working from home. Working from home is not always the easiest thing, and it brings different challenges. And repeatedly, I've heard, how do I professionally adapt to this new world? And mostly, do I want to? You know, heaps of business bankruptcies. It's really sad. Even now, when I'm walking around some local shops, you know, shop for lease, shop for lease, shop for rent. It's sad because so many businesses haven't sustained COVID. And still for many people, there's this huge uncertainty as organizations try and, you know, realign what they're doing. They downsize staffing. They're trying to work whether they should get rid of half of the workforce because some of us can work from home. There's just a lot of uncertainty, and which means then that there's a lot of stress out there. I see it everywhere. I see it in the form, for example, of road rage. I always tell the story, probably a while ago now, where I was on the Harbour Bridge and the entire traffic stopped because there was some jam or something, and we sat on, this was before COVID, mind you, but still, and there we were, sat on the Harbour Bridge, and I had forgotten my phone. I didn't have it there. Anyway, long story cut short, the guy in front of me got out of his car and then went to the guy in front of him. Obviously, the guy in front of him had done something, swerved in front of him, you know, given him the finger. But this guy actually grabbed this other guy out of the car and began thumping him on the Harbour Bridge. And guess what? Nobody did a thing. So I get out my car, and I'm not exactly a large woman. I'm tall, but quite slender. And I say, stop doing that. Nobody does a thing. And I don't know if you talk about divine intervention, but there was this huge Islander guy behind me in a huge truck. I told him to get out of his truck and sort it out, which he did. But I mean, what was that about? You know, where couldn't we just relax in that? Couldn't we just, do we have to go to road rage? There's lots of worry about the future. And I'm sure there's a lot of you, when I'm going to be asking you these questions just now, you've got lots of different worries in your life. And there will be some of you who'll be saying, yeah, I'm Gen Y and I can really do this digitalization thing. But for some of you, it's a whole new game. Working from home, even now, me talking to you via Zoom, I would never have done this 18 months ago. I would rather have got you in a room because, you know, face to face is what we did. And I'm sure some of you may be saying, what does my future hold? So there's lots and lots of different things that are forming part of our lives as to whether we're worried about these things or we're coping with them. So if COVID-19 and all it brings equals stress, does it then mean if we manage our stress well that we tend to be more resilient? And that's what I'm talking about today in your roles, okay? That's a really important question. And the things we really need to be asking ourselves, what will I be doing differently now and in the future? Like, are there ways that I could simplify my life? Are there ways that I could work better so that I don't feel so much under stress? Are there ways that I can do things differently? How can my life be different? How can I be an outstanding person in a leadership role to guide the future? You know, what can I do better to lead more effectively? So I thought I'm going to just quickly give you a quick poll here. Okay, have a look at this poll. Now, it's one choice answer only, but the question is this: what is the one thing that stresses you most at work? Just one. Now, you could say all of these things stress me hugely. Fair enough. I'm asking you to answer just one. And I'd be very interested to see what you say. So I'm just busy launching the poll. There you go. What is the one thing that stresses you most? Too much to do, not enough time, too many things coming at me at once, overload, plan overload, firefighting. I feel like I should buy a fireman's suit most days. Getting involved in little things that people under me should address. I am so tired, I ache. I just don't look after myself well, which I think is quite a big thing to accept, because, you know, that is part of the problem that we may have, is the fact that we don't look after ourselves well. Working in a high demand industry, which gets bigger every year, or feels like it. Okay, so there's about another 10 of you to answer this. And I think the important thing here, ladies and gentlemen, is be honest with yourself. I can't see who you are. I can just see that questions are being answered, that's all. But, you know, if you feel that you are not looking after yourself, then put it out there. Because these series are for you. Give you a couple more seconds. Okay. Here we go. I'm just going to end the poll now. And have a look. Have a look at the answers that you've given me. So what you've said is that too many things coming to me at once is just almost 40% of you say there's just too many things happening. Then you've got 30% of you, too much to do, just not enough time. Welcome to the not-for-profit sector, right? Then you've got 14 saying getting involved in little things that people under me should address. And that's the problem, right, in leadership. Here's the thing I wanted to just make about that, is that one of the most important things in your job, and I made this comment last time, I'll make it again, as leaders, is to make sure that the people under you are as upskilled and as competent and as capable as they can be. Because if they are as competent and capable, then you don't have to get involved in the little things. The more you're getting involved in what I call the mosh pit, the less you're leading, the more you're managing. And the more you manage and get involved in this, because your people aren't able and capable or have the competence to do those things, the more you're going to get dragged down. So just remember that the most important thing you have to do is to make sure that you've got competent, capable people under you. Okay, so 10%, I just don't look after myself well. I don't eat as well as I should, no exercise, and it works against me, and it always will. And then, of course, that goes hand in hand with that fatigue. I go to bed tired, drag myself through the day, and go to bed tired, relentless. I mean, I just, you know, when you think about that ongoing fatigue, you can never operate from a place of high performance, of kind of being on top of your game if you're tired all the time, which is why the Japanese used sleep deprivation as one of the methods of torture in the Second World War. People say, I can live without water, I can live without food, I can live without sleep. There's two things we cannot live without in terms of within a 3-day period. Number one, within a few minutes period is oxygen. And the second thing is sleep. We can live longer without food. I think Bobby Sands, remember Bobby Sands, the IRA guy who was taking a stand? It took him 69 days, I think it was, to die of starvation. But we can live longer without food and water than we can without sleep. So if you are fatigued and you are not looking after yourself, be aware, because often those two as a contribution together go hand in hand towards a huge major health scare. So what I want you to do, guys and ladies, is to take a step back and think about having a look at this. Is there anything I can be doing differently that would reduce the stress I feel and increase resilience? Now, we know for an absolute fact that the healthier you are, the more you are able to be exercising, eating well, sleeping. Generally, you're able to deal with some of the difficulties and the stresses that keep coming your way. The more behind the 8 ball, the more weight you're carrying, the less fit you are. It's harder to kind of get onto your game. A friend of mine said to me the other day, she said to me, I want to lose 10 kilograms. And then I said, well, that's quite a lot of weight. And she said, yeah, I went into a pet barn the other day and I lifted up a bag of 10-kilogram dog food. And I said, whoa. And she said, that's what I'm wanting to lose. And then she said to me, and what I realized is that I'm carrying that 10 kilograms extra every day. And what I realize is that before I get out of bed, I'm tired because I've got this, band around my waist. So think about these things. Think about how you are living and think about whether you actually could be doing things differently and better. So good work there, people. Really a bit of insight maybe to how you see things and actually how you actually operate in the role that you've got and some of the factors that are really concerning for you. Now, some of the stuff I'm going to show you now, you might know, some of it you may not, but here's the thing. This is my challenge to you. Maybe it's a diamond. Diamonds are those little things I add in that may not be in your manual, right? If you know how to manage your stress well, this is the diamond. If you know how to manage your stress well, why are you not doing it? If you know how to manage your stress well, why are you not doing it? And in fact, before I go any further, anybody want to answer me that question in the Q&A box? Like, if you know what to do, why is it that you feel you're not doing it? And I'm not going to mention your name. I'm just going to mention what you say. Is it that I don't have the motivation? Is it that I don't really have the time? What could that be? So let's see what some of you say. Conflicting interests. Okay, so one of you said, well, yeah, too many things to do. So that could be kids, it could be making lunches for the kids, it could be sorting out breakfast. I get this often. It could be that I've got to rush from work and I've got to then run home and I've got to sort things out at home. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Changing habits is very difficult because I've always been doing this and I keep on doing this, because I'm always doing what I've been doing. And so I just keep doing it. The problem is that if you keep doing things that aren't working for you, then it means ultimately that on some level, they've got to be working against you. And one of you saying it can be difficult to stop, then plan self-care when life is still going on. And that's exactly the point, is to stop, take that, step back and really look at everything across your life. Are you looking after yourself? Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says, so what I want you quickly to do, people, is this is not in your book, so it's a diamond, if you like. Draw a pizza, draw a round circle, and draw 4 equal-sized quarters in that circle. Okay, so the bottom left slice, call it cognitive, i.e. brain, cognitive. And then on the right, the bottom right, call that physical slice. Top right is the social emotional slice. And the top left then is the spiritual slice. Okay, now, when you talk about the cognitive slice, what are we talking about? How do we actually, what do we need to do to look after our brains? Things like studying, reading, problem solving. You know, you're all operating out of your cognitive pie slice all day, every day. On the physical slice, it's things like, obviously, sleeping 8 hours, drinking 8 glasses of water, keeping the booze down, getting rid of the fags, watching your diet, keeping your portions under control, exercise 3 to 4 times a week, 30 to 40 minutes a time. So watching your physical carriage, because here's the thing, here's a diamond for you. My grandmother told me this when I was about 9. You ready? Here we go. Health is all. Without health, you have nothing. So health is all. Without health, you have nothing. And yet, as a people, we Australians gamble with health a lot. We're not a particularly out there and you know, exercise conscious people. In fact, I heard something not that long ago that we are the most obese nation on the planet. I remember thinking that's nonsense. We couldn't be more obese per capita than the Americans. Yes, we are. Now, in the top right-hand corner is social emotional. This is the area of friends and family and connecting, you know, being part of a tribe, if you like. And then the top left is your spiritual side, whereas that taking a step back and looking at things. And, you know, that's things like meditation, yoga, music, animals, just that quiet, reflective time. Now, Covey says, if you ever want to read his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I think is a great piece of work, he says that we should all be spending 1 hour in every slice of that pie every day to live a balanced life. 1 hour in cognitive, 1 hour in physical, 1 hour in social, emotional, 1 hour in spiritual. How many of you then can tell yourself or me that you are living a balanced life? Out of the 30 odd of you on the line right now, I might have 5 of you who are living a balanced life. So one of the things about managing stress is balance. Take a step back, have a look at his pie. Are there things that you need to do more of to get the balance? And one of you says, I'm doing it, I'm managing it well, fantastic. One of you says, I don't really have the knowledge to manage stress properly. Hopefully we can get something going for you here. So that was a really great little circle that I use a lot in my work. So if you quickly have a look at, you know, health of loved ones is an issue, financial stress, some of us have personal relationships, some of you on the line might be in relationships that really don't work that well, a lot of emotional and mental health stress, environmental factors, heaven forbid, you know, if we don't get these most horrific bushfires in New South Wales, then we get COVID. It's like, when does it stop? You know, finances, injuries we may have, staffing issues, difficult family members like mother-in-laws, heaven forbid. And that existential question of what am I doing? So all of these things we need to think about, because these things all impact us, whether we like it or not. And what's important is not that these things impact us. It's how we deal with these things that impact us that's important. So, okay, let's swing then into the definition of stress. So what is this thing called stress? It's a state of mental, physical, or emotional strain or tension resulting from some kind of adverse or demanding circumstances. And it does not only have to be at work, it could be your health, it could be your relationships, it could be anywhere, or it could be a combination of all of them when we just go into stress overload. Stress simply is the outcome of a relationship between 3 things. And most people don't know this if I ask them. Stress is comprised of 3 different things. Number 1, your personality. I'll talk about that in a minute. Number 2, perceived pressure. And number 3, your coping skills. And the more you understand your personality, the more you see perceived pressure as things that can be resolved, the more you go across a range of different coping mechanisms, you either go into overload, which is, or you go into growth, which is kind of grooving through things one thing at a time. And so let's just have a look at them. So stress, remember, is 3 things: personality, how we deal with pressure, and how we use a range of coping mechanisms across our lives to either cope well or to drown. Okay, so the fact here is that, and one of the things I do in another series, which is the Communicating with Confidence series, which is the second series after this one, there's a session where I talk a lot about dealing with different personalities at work. The fact is that some of us are just born more wired than others are. And we have to work a lot harder at our stress then to keep it at bay, to keep it under control. So you might say to me, well, what does that mean? Okay, I'll give you this example. So you've got two children, right? Two little babies, and they're 3 weeks old, let's say. They're from different parents, or they could be twins even. So they're in their little cots, they've just been fed and burped and changed, and they're happy. Why does the one lie there gurgly, just playing with his little feet and toes, and the one next to him, exactly the same environmental conditions, is agitated more, more kind of wide for just more agitation and crying? So personality is it's a set of characteristics with which we are born, that are genetically transpired. Now, here's the thing. Our personality grows as we go through life, obviously, in terms of things that happen to us, education, religion, culture, all those things. But the point that I'm making is that some of us are just wired to be more angsty than others. And those people who are more angsty, now I'm going to, according to something called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which is a personality profile, which you will do in the second series. Now, the J's are people who tend to be very much more orderly, structured. They love lists. They like things in the right place and the place for everything. And the P's, on the opposite side of the spectrum, are people who kind of just go with the flow, easygoing, she'll be right. So you've got the J's, the judging, and the P's, the perceiving. And the P's are much more easygoing as people. And the J's, those people that are wired more, we have to work harder at this thing called stress, because we tend, excuse me, to just be more wired up to be more anxious than others. And I'm a more anxious person. I'm more wired highly than my siblings are. Certainly my older sister is so relaxed. People often joke she'll be late for her own funeral. And yet I have to work a lot harder at it. And that's through things like that I've just described on the covey pie. I run most days. I watch my diet, because I find that if I'm able to run, and running for me really fits into the spiritual thing as well. It's my downtime. It's where I kind of think things through. But it's looking after those things that keep me as relaxed as I possibly can be, if possible. So, you need to work out, are you more wired or are you more relaxed? If you're more wired, then stay with me, because this is important. Now, what happens in life is that things, here you are, you're all happy, right? Life is good. And then things happen. You get this happen, and then that happen, and then this happen, and then that happen. And what happens in life is that we just get this ongoing amalgamation of things that come at us, which you all do in the business you're in, right? But what happens is, here you're happy, and then it becomes that you've got stress. And then you've got pressure. You feel kind of overwhelmed and overloaded. And then if you don't use a range of coping mechanisms to stay well and to manage your stress, you move into the domain of stress. And if you're walking around stressed most or all of the time, you have a health hazard waiting to happen. So what I'm talking about is, if you think about a pressure cooker, so it starts off cold and slowly but surely gets hotter and hotter and hotter until everything just blows, right? So that's what a pressure cooker is. And how many of you feel like that? How many of you are just kind of carrying, and the more that comes your way, the more uptight you get, the more overwhelmed you get, and the more you feel as if you're going to explode. Okay, the more irritations boil up, the less you feel you can deal with them, then it explodes. Like a pressure cooker, if we do not use a range of coping mechanisms to deal with this thing called pressure, it leads to stress. And stress kills people. It kills. I believe that stress is the core root of things like cancer, diabetes, multiple sclerosis. I believe that, because there's so many things. And I think it's often because we don't get rid of that stress. We don't get rid of the stuff that's kind of getting us from pressure and getting us going until we kind of pop. And these coping mechanisms, I bet you know them all, But what I want you to do is ask yourself, do you use them? No good knowing something, people, and then not using it to your advantage, right? We all know that. Why know something if you're not going to use it? Regular exercise, I'm saying to you, 3 to 4 times a week. If you can't do it 3 to 4 times a week, I'm going to ask you the question, why? Because you're so busy. And I know, for example, some of you might have kids and then you've got to get to work. Can you get somebody to help you with the kids in the morning? Can you buy yourself 3 hours a week for you? Because that's what's important. Are you a person who comes past, health, what's it, Happy Jacks or whatever it is? Gosh, I don't even know the name. Or Macca's on the way home and just puts the stuff in your face because it's easy. Yeah, it's easy, but it's not healthy necessarily. And it's not going to help you manage your stress, because what I said to you is you've got to be absolutely in peak shape to deal with the stress that you've got, which is much more than a lot of other industries in which I operate. You need your sleep. I had a woman years ago, she came all the way to Tamworth. I was working for a disability service provider doing some training, and she'd driven 6 hours to get to the training I was running. And I said to her, why? And she said, oh, just because I had so much to do, I thought I'd leave at 3 in the morning. That's ridiculous. She was asleep at 9:30. By 9:45, she was snoring. And I said to her, you're going to burn out like this. This is not the way to live. So make sure that if you're not sleeping well, go to your doctor, go to a sleeping clinic, get that sorted. Because if you don't sleep well, you're never going to cope with life. Balance. Go back to Covey's pie. You have to spend time in every slice of every pie. And if you say to me, I don't have the time, I'm going to challenge you and say, you're not listening. Take that step back. Think about your life. Have a look at it. You're always going to get things coming at you in the work you're doing. You're always going to get things that are going to be demanding and overwhelming. But stop, breathe. One thing at a time. And it's literally that. Organize your desk so that you've got things. This is the in trade. This is what I'm working with. This is out. Absolutely, things are going to come your way. But one of the most important things we know from research is to get organized and to think calmly, which is one of the things that I mentioned in the first session. Now, this also, do you meditate? Do you do music, animals, all the stuff I'm talking about? I love massage. If I can have a massage any time of the day, I will go. Painting, books, whatever it is. So the more of these things you use regularly, the better off you're going to keep your pressure from going into stress. So it's about, if you're feeling really overwhelmed, take a walk around the lake. If you're feeling as if you just cannot manage and you're burning out, I say take a mental health day. Now, whether I should be saying that or not, I don't know, but I'll tell you what I do think, is that at the end of the day, your health is the most important thing you've got, as I said to you just now in a diamond. And if you don't look after it, that's okay, because eventually it will look after itself, which will mean it'll either stop, you'll have some significant sickness, or you'll just not be able to move. So we need to take a really strong think about this. We all need purpose. Like, why are you doing the job you're doing? Are you enjoying it? Have you got passion in what you're doing? And I would suspect that all of you do. But you've also got to have purpose and passion to get out of bed every day and to live the best day you can, because it might be your last. So it's about taking that step back and really thinking about what you're doing. I will mention on 3 or 4 different occasions through this particular thing today, optimism. Optimism is absolutely key in everything that we do. And I speak so often about the word attitude. Attitude, here's a diamond. Attitude is everything. Your attitude is everything. You can get out of bed grumpy, growling, moaning, or you can get out of bed saying, I'm not feeling that good, but I'm going to go into the world today with this great attitude of can do as opposed to cannot do. And we know from the research that the more optimistic you are, generally, the more you tend to get satisfaction from life. Often you're richer, you certainly have better health, your relationships are better. So there's so much research to point to having an optimistic mindset. But remember, it's great to be optimistic if you are well. It's more difficult if you are not well. Stop being so hard on yourself when you make mistakes, the guilt or the self-hate or the self-loathing. What's that about? I see it so often. And I see a lot of that with women around confidence, self-doubt. lack of self-belief. What is that? You're doing a fantastic job. You're wonderful people. You should be applauded. So stop being so hard on yourself. Now, there's 3 types of stress, right? The acute one, short in duration, sharp, painful. So argument with the spouse, traffic jam, as I explained just now, running late, being behind. It's short, it's sharp, it's very, very real. And sometimes you can get a, as I say, there are fast heart rate. Often, by the way, this will take you into panic attacks. I'm seeing more panic attacks now as a psychologist, particularly in younger people, than I ever have before. Panic attacks are rife. And generally they come from a fear, an inability to cope with something. Then you get chronic stress, which is what you are, the area you're working in. Homelessness, domestic violence, you know this better than I do, longer term, constant. Some of the women living, or the people living in domestic violence, you know better than most, believe that that's normal. So the chronic stress that they're living in is what is normal. So, that's what I do every day. And we know, obviously, that DV or survivors of DV often become homeless, all the stuff you know. And then we've got the really good stress. We all need a certain amount of stress every day to get out of bed. That we call eustress. It's a good stress. So, for example, it gets you going. I got up this morning, I went for a run, I thought, yep, I'm going to be working with Vinnie's this morning. I was actually really looking forward to it. So I got myself organized, passion, purpose. I mean, there was adrenaline in that. There's stress for me to get on here and talk to you about the things I know and hopefully will help you. And so we need much more of the eustress, and the chronic and the acute we don't need. We need to try and work out ways of reducing or minimizing those types of stress in our lives. Now, you might say, well, Karen, that's great. You're just being a little bit unrealistic. I get that. It's not always easy to eliminate all types of stress. I'm not suggesting. But what I am saying is take a look at what it is that you're dealing with. Try sometimes to chunk it down. There's a beautiful saying, how do you eat an elephant? Piece by piece by piece. And what that means is if you've got this huge elephant where you feel overwhelmed and it's sitting in your office or it's sitting in your lounge room, and you think, how the heck am I going to eat this elephant? Piece by piece, which means one thing at a time. And very often people who feel overwhelmed and stressed, it's because they don't feel as if they are on top of or managing what's coming at them, which is a mindset. That's all it is. Calm, one thing at a time. And of course, the other things that I've been talking about today. Now we know to fight or flight. How about flow? You all know, do we fight? Do we flight? This initially actually evolved as a survival mechanism, enabling people and other mammals to react quickly. And we still do it, particularly around stress or what we perceive as stress. But our bodies also overreact to stresses that might not be threatening, like, as I said, traffic jams, work pressure. Sometimes we're so used to being stressed that we just stressed all the time, whereas we may not necessarily need to be stressed. To flow is all the things I'm talking about. Stop, breathe, calm, one thing at a time. I think the most important outcome here today really around stress is to look after your health and think calm, because that's what's important. Just let things go over you. Don't get yourself into such a state that everything seems to be stressful, because what happens is our heart attacks us. There's no doubt about that. Now, sometimes I've had this as a discussion and people don't necessarily agree with me, but I'm not talking here about the big ticket items, the loss of a loved one or, a major health scare. I'm not talking about that. I believe that stress is a choice in everyday life. So let me explain why I say that. Adversity is going to happen. If I say to any of you or all of you on the line, how many of you live this perfect Vinnie's life? How many of you have a life that is devoid of challenge, that has no hardships, that doesn't have arguments or conflict at times? If I ask you, none of you will respond because none of you live the perfect life. So accept that adversity happens. Accept we've done, what can we do about it? It's happening or it happened. So there's nothing we can do about it, except maybe just sit calmly and think about it, as opposed to getting all the flight or the fight response. Stressing and worrying has one outcome. It'll make you sick. So if you've got something that's really worrying you, do something about solving it. Don't let it just become part of your everyday life. General daily living, we have a choice in the way we respond or react to adversity. And that comes back to what I was saying. When you get out of bed, is my mindset positive? I'm going to have a great day. I'm going to be optimistic. Things will be wonderful. Even adversity comes, I can deal with it. You know, I'm well equipped. I'm in the right mindset. Or do we just react? So do we respond is more kind of hands outstanding like this, or do we react, which is like this? And if we find that we're mostly living in reaction, firefighting, we are not living optimally. It's not the best way to enjoy this time called life. And if there's nothing you can do, remain calm. I think calm is one of the most important things that most people don't think about. And we know from so much of the studies around leadership, which I mentioned in the first session, is that those leaders who are better at just maintaining that sense of calm tend to lead better in times of adversity or struggle. And it's no different to your own lives. Try and get calm around a situation if it's happened or happening, because do as much as you can, but then don't, as best you can, worry about it as much as you can, because you're doing everything you can to try and solve it. As I say, do everything you can to rectify it. Positive, hopeful for the future. So the most important thing with stress is to use as many coping mechanisms as you possibly can. So that's your exercise, your eating, your movies, your massage, you know, your painting, whatever it may be. And if you don't have the time to use those coping mechanisms, I'd say to you, well, you're not looking after your health. And remember, health is all. So stress is largely a choice. Some of you are saying, I've got so many things coming at me that I can't manage. Calm. Number one, work out how you can get the people under you to be really competent in their roles, hold them to be accountable and responsible. Number two, make sure that if they are competent and capable, that you are there more as a strategic advisor, as opposed to somebody who's managing with them in the mosh pit. And the more you can do that, and the more you can actually teach your people about how to cope with stressful situations, the less kind of reactive you have to be, the less fires you have to fight each and every day. Because even in the industry you are, it's very demanding, it's exhausting. So make sure that you've got all of your soldiers well equipped to deal with the stressful thing that we call homelessness and housing. Stress is directly related to the way in which we feel pressure and how we deal with it. So stress is a mindset. And obviously, as I've said on various occasions, the more healthy we are, the better we are able to think optimistically and deal with one thing at a time calmly, the better we will be at the end of the day. And when we've got that stress and that adversity, resilience is our ability to recover from it. Now, some people never recover. They just go from one stress to the next stress to the next stress, or what they perceive as stress. And ultimately, they just become so exhausted that they can't get out of bed one day. So you can see how everything is related to everything here, ladies and gentlemen. It's not that resilience is out there and stress is out there. They are completely intertwined. In other words, you cannot be resilient if you do not manage your stress well. And if you do not manage your stress well, ultimately you can't be resilient. So this is what the research tells us. So managing our stress is critically important, because if we're able to do that as best we can and feel a greater sense of calm and control over what it is that we're dealing with, generally the more resilient we become. So what's the importance now moving into resilience? What is this thing called resilience? And the fact is that probably now more than ever before, we really need to be resilient. And the problem we have is that we've got this huge increase in mental health, which means that people are struggling mentally. And people who are struggling mentally, I mean, obviously their lives aren't working as well as they would like them to. And they're not as resilient as potentially they could be, because they may have ongoing anxiety, depression, you know, schizophrenia, borderline, whatever it may be. And the fact is that right now there's been a huge increase in mental health and mental health at work. One of the things in the research I was reading yesterday was that The top 10 CEOs who are part of this research are talking about one of the key things they're going to be doing this year, for the next 2 years actually, is to increase the number of people in their HR so that the HR people can place a greater importance on and service to people in their organization who are struggling with increased mental health issues. So mental health is becoming a huge problem. And when we talk about real resilience, these are the only things. I think when I look at these animals, I just thought I'd throw this in here. These guys are built for survival. They can go for 6 months without food, without water, in these harsh environments. And obviously they've got, water, etc., fat in their humps, so that's how they survive. They don't sweat until their body reaches 41. And they can recover by drinking, get that 113 liters of water in 13 minutes, right? But if we're not like that, we're not camels. We're not really equipped for great resilience in terms of animals are much better if you think about it. So it's more important that do we as human beings have the ability to adapt to the changing circumstances in which we find ourselves, both within our work, within the industry in which you're operating, both within the society, community, COVID. Do we do this well, or are we struggling? So let's talk a little bit about what resilience is then. What is resilience? So resilience is different things to different people, but the general term is that resilience is the ability to bounce back in or after difficult or challenging situations. Resilience is the ability to pick yourself up, persevere, and on some level just keep going, right? People will talk about that. Resilience, people will say, is the ability to bounce back after adversity. I think that resilience is the ability to bounce forward, to greet whatever challenge is facing you with some sense of hope and optimism. When life happens and we've got these big things, we've got two choices in that moment. We can roll over and let it affect us and ruin our life or ruin our work or ruin our relationships, or we might take a moment to just gather our thoughts towards ourselves and really think it through, and then come up with a range of solutions or strategies that maybe we can think about to resolve this issue, and to believe that at the end of the day, everything will be okay. Optimism, hope. Resilience is about hope. Now, this guy over here, do you remember him? His name was Aaron Ralston. So he was out there, most amazing thing. He was out there in I think it was the Black Rock Desert near Nevada. I think that's where it was. And he was an outdoor guy, right? So he knows, as an outdoor walker or camper or adventurer, the key thing in this industry that he's, or in the sport that he's doing, is that you always tell people where you're going. If you're going to go for a walk out in the desert on your own, you've got a phone or you've got the navigation or whatever it is that these people do. So this guy, Aaron Ralston, decided, no, he'll go on his own. So he didn't tell anybody, which was breaking rule number 1. And rule number 1 was the survival rule. So, not the smartest, I didn't think. So there he is out in the desert. And however he did it, I don't know. I never saw the movie. But he got his right arm caught under a huge boulder. And no matter what he did, trying to push it with the left, pull it out, kick it, he could not remove his arm from under the boulder. How he got it there, I don't know, right? So what happened was he realized he had a little penknife and he had a hanky in his pocket. So he did a tourniquet around here, I think it was, or here, wherever, somewhere, near the elbow, and he cut his own arm off. Now that is resilience. He knew that he hadn't told anybody he was going to die. So resilience is the ability in that situation to think about how I will recover. If he didn't have that penknife, he wouldn't be here. So, it's a bit of I appreciate it's an extreme example, but take the lesson from it. There have been so many studies about resilience. And when I first saw this photograph, can you believe this? I must have run this particular online session 5-6 times before I actually saw the dog in the picture. And I thought to myself, how did I miss that? And I thought I probably missed it because I wasn't in the moment really looking at this picture. I sort of looked at the top half of the picture, and it made me stop and think, well, I need to also work on just taking more downtime. Because if I had and been more kind of involved and more engaged in what I was trying to say in the photograph, I would have seen that. So research around resilience has typically focused on studies around trauma. That's really what we've looked at. We're including natural disasters, warfare, discrimination, domestic violence, childhood abuse, hostage negotiators, all that sort of stuff. And there's been amazing studies around it. Studies show those who have suffered incomprehensible hardships can and have shown resilience in being able to bounce forward from the experience. And that Aaron Woolston was one thing. I'll give you an example of something that I saw not that long ago. They were doing an interview with an old digger. This was about 2 years ago, and it was on a Foxtel History Channel. I remember that well. And this old digger was about 95, and he was obviously in the Second World War, and he had his little hat on from the war, and he was dressed in his, uniform, etc. Just a beautiful man. And the interviewer was asking him about the Second World War and asked him a question around what was the greatest loss you had in the war. Why you would ask a digger the question like that, who knows? I don't. And I remember watching this man. Now the war was whatever it was, 80 years ago, right? So it's getting on now. And so very few people who experienced the Second World War are actually going to be alive now because they've gone. So she asked him this question, and I watched this digger, and he was very, very stoic. He was wonderful. And then I noticed his little chin was kind of quibbling like this, right? And I just remember saying to myself, he's going to cry. Anyway, he started to weep a little bit, and then he just sobbed, and he was inconsolable. And I remember thinking to myself, can you please take the camera off this man? Give him some pride, give him some dignity, which they did. Why am I telling you that story? Because that old digger has got on with his life. But obviously what he had experienced, the incomprehensible loss that he had, is something that he will never lose. How do you get over those kind of things? You don't. It's more about learning to live with them and trying to create as best a life you can, regardless of the hardships in the past. And I think that's probably a lot of the stuff that you do in your work. Vulnerable people, marginalized people in society who've had the most horrific hardships. And can they survive and thrive? Yes, they can. They may need the help and the therapy and the support and the guidance, but yes, they can. So, resilience as ability to keep on going, regardless of what we've actually experienced in the back of our lives. And I always think that, it's about really thinking about the good things that life often happens. Life offers us wonderful things. Let's not focus on the things that we feel it takes away. Let's focus on the things we believe it gives. So through genetics and the natural conditioning and challenges of life, some of us are just more inherently resilient than others. And I absolutely believe that resilience is a mindset. Resilience is the way that we look at something and the way that we interpret what that thing is and how it's affecting us. And then in that moment, getting upset if we need to, getting angry if we need to, but then calming and then really kind of work out, okay, take a step back. How am I going to deal with this problem in my life? And what we know is a lot of it comes from optimistic thinking. So resilience, interestingly enough, can be learned and built over time through a changing of thinking, which leads to more positive actions and outcomes. I think a lot of people I know wait for the good times to come. But what about making the good times come? Being kind of the creators of our own destiny? Or are we so involved in the issues that we're dealing with that we don't actually take that step back and really, here's a really great question for you. Here's a diamond for you. Are you in the driver's seat of your life and career, or is somebody else? Are you in the driver's seat of your life and your career, or is somebody else. So if somebody else is in the driver's seat of your life and your career, I want you to take a stop, put the stop button on. I want you to really think about how you're going to get into the driver's seat. And once you've worked that out and you're more resilient and managing your stress better, then you press the go button and start again. Because you've only got one shot at this time called life unless you believe in reincarnation. It is believed that resilience comes about through a certain way of thinking, and again turns into positive action and a sense of achievement. So positive explanatory style people is a psychological term that we use for people who have things happen to them, but think about those things, even if they are negative experiences, in a more positive way. So here's an example. I don't know, a couple of months ago, I was coming backwards out of a car park, and I had a look around and there was nobody there. So I went and I hit into the side of a truck. I'm telling you, I looked, he wasn't there. So I got out and I was so apologetic and I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't dent his car, but certainly I dented mine, and he was fine with that. Now, a negative explanatory style, I could have said to myself, what an idiot, what a fool. That's your problem. You can't even drive right. You can't get things right. Now you've got to go and pay whatever it is, $800 excess. How stupid are you? So negative, right? Negative explanatory style. Or positive explanatory style. I can say to myself, wow, I really need to be a little bit more careful than that. Generally, I think I'm quite a good driver, but I think I need to be more careful. And hopefully that's a lesson for my learning. And thank heavens nobody was hurt. You see the difference? And so once we've got the more positive explanatory style, we tend to manage our stress better. We tend to be more resilient. So the resilient thinkers are people who take a breath and look for a way through or around a problem. They never give up. You know, you always see those things in offices, never give up, or, you know, no matter what life throws at you, just keep going. And that's so true. Because I really think that the ability to enjoy our lives very often is how we deal with life, the way that we look at the challenges that we have at work, at home, in the community, whatever, and the way that we perceive things that happen to us. And ultimately, those people who have a much more positive and explanatory style of living in life and adversity tend to be living more optimally. Those people who tend to see the negatives and stress and, you know, are kind of worry-warts and always feel overloaded and out of control are people who tend to feel less resilient, more anxious generally. I must say that, again, in my psychology practice, I've talked about panic attacks. I see a lot more anxiety right now than I've ever seen. So you see very often, I mean, I'm not saying that thinking positively reduces anxiety myself, but it certainly can have a better outcome, potentially, than to just focus on that anxiety and focus on something that's really worrying you. It might need more medication. That's fine. Medication has its place, but it still comes back to the way that we see things and the way that we view what happens to us. So, you know, I would have liked this slide to have said building resilience after COVID, but we're not out of the woods yet, as I said. Almost, you know, 350,000 people in India. What we have to do is adapt. So, for example, we were always a face-to-face business. I love face-to-face, so do my trainers. And since COVID, we just had to adapt. So what I'm doing is talking to you online. It's not my preference, but if we don't adapt, we don't make or go with the change. I said to you on various occasions today that health is wealth. Look after it. Because if you haven't got your health, you've got nothing. And I think sometimes we forget that. Expect that life will provide for you. Like, be hopeful, be positive. If you make bad mistakes, learn from them. There's no good in, you know, self-flogging and thinking what an idiot I am and what a fool I am. Certainly sit in that, you know, dwell in that kind of negative environment for an hour or 2 hours or a day because you need to have your learning. But don't keep in there because it's not going to help you. Look for solutions when things go wrong. Watch your self-talk. Always watch your self-talk. And if you're a person who really is a very negative thinker, or you have a lot of negative thinking at times, here's an experiment I want you to do. I want you to take an A4 piece of paper, right? And for one day, I want you to write down every time you have a negative thought. So you can either tick negative thought, or you could actually write out the negative thought. The better thing would be to write out the negative thought, right? And then I want at the end of the day, before you close your eyes and you're going to bed, to count out how many ticks or how many negative words you have on that page. You know, I did this with a client not that long ago, probably about 6 months ago, and she had over 900 ticks on her page for one day. So if you've got so many negative thoughts popping into your head, that is a habit. Negative thinking is habitual. The great thing is that we can change that negative thinking into positive thinking. So you've just got to learn how to do that. One of the things I say is, if you've got all of these negative thoughts on the left-hand side of your page, so let's just say you've got a page A4 and you've got a line down the middle. On the very left, you write all of the negative comments for the day. And then what I want you to do is an exercise on the right-hand side, put a more positive comment to overcome the negative comment. So let's just say on the left-hand side, you say, oh my God, I made such a mess of that meeting. What an idiot. Okay, negative. Then I want you on the right-hand side to put that phrase in a more positive way, saying things like, well, I probably could have done better in the meeting today. What a great learning. I'll try harder next time. And so what we know is that if you constantly replace your negative thinking with positive thinking, ultimately what happens is that you start thinking just more positively. Now, this could take months. You can't just wake up one day and say, right, I'm just going to get the negative out the door and bring in the positive. It's practice like a skill. But again, there's so many things that you can do to check your self-talk. Live the balanced life. I've explained that to you, the pie. Expect and accept that things will go wrong. Life will never be perfect. One of the key things is to have clearly defined goals. And the goal, you know, it's like there's a great saying. Here's a diamond, right? Dream big. Create goals. Design action plans. Monitor. Dream big. Have goals. Design action plans. Monitor. So if you've got a dream or you want to do something, have a goal. If you don't have goals, you're going to get nowhere. And there's no point having a goal, smart goal, unless you've got an action plan attached to the goal, because how will you know where you're going? And you know, it's more people in life do not have goals than people who do. And we know if people have goals and they follow the goals, they tend to be more purposeful, more passionate, live better, by the way, wealthier, by the way, they tend to be healthier. So things to think about. Good time management skills, I think, is a really good thing for all of you in your roles, because your roles are so stressy at times. And I think we need to honor that. We need to absolutely honor that the work you're doing can be very stressful. But we also need to honor that maybe there's things you could be doing better and differently to take some of the sting, the stress out of the role, in the way that you approach it, in the way that you deal with it, in the way that you manage your stress, and in the way that you learn how to manage your time well. And here's a really great diamond, which I've probably alluded to through most of the session. Do one thing at a time well. Do one thing at a time well. When you're living in firefighting mode, it's like you're popping from here, then to there, then to there, and to there. And then what you're doing is that you're bouncing all over the place like an ever-ready bunny. And you're not really feeling as if you're in control of things, because you're not. You're so busy bouncing around that by the end of the day, you're so exhausted. And then you realize that, heck, you know, I've done so much bouncing today, I haven't even done my own work. So strategy, focus, one thing at a time. Am I in control? Expect things to come your way that you had not anticipated, because you're going to get that. So factor that in your day. What are the top 3 things you have to do today? And make sure that no matter what comes through your life on that day, you will not leave your office or your office at home without having done those 3 things. I think be realistic in what you're trying to achieve. Lots of gratitude. You're working for an absolutely awesome organization who's doing wonderful things in the community. And I think all of you need to be praised. You're wonderful. Thank God for people like you. Remember that everyone is fighting their own battles, and not everybody has resilience, preferring to give up and not fight on. And that's, I think, a really important comment for all of you online who are leaders. You know, you may learn resilience, and you're so welcome to share this particular session with your people. You may learn resilience, you may have it, but remember, there might be people working under you who don't. So stop and take the time of day to connect with your people. Because without your people, like your health, you haven't got much. So you might as well focus on having great relationships with them. Be influential in their lives, motivate them, talk to them, show them that you're supportive and that you're there for them. So what are the 7 C's of resilience? Here they go. Competence. The ability to know how to handle stressful situations. You're all competent in your roles, otherwise Brett wouldn't have you in them. You know what you're doing, but remember a calm approach to what you're doing. Slow, one thing at a time. Keep focused, because the more you're the ever-ready bunny, the less focused, the more exhausted, the more overwhelmed. Confidence in what you're doing. How many people do I coach? Oh my gosh, men and women, more women actually, who have the imposter syndrome. I'm just in this job, but one day they're going to find out that I actually don't know what I'm doing and I can't do this job. Of course, you can do the job. You might have areas that you've got to improve upon, but you have absolutely everything that you need to do a job well. Do you have the people under you to do the job well? And if you've got some gaps, my suggestion to you is, as I've said, just like Richard Branson does, make sure that developing the people under you to be highly competent and highly capable is the first thing you do every day in your role, because you need them as your soldiers to go out there and help, you know, doing whatever you're doing on the front line. And you are on the front line, your people are. Connection. You know, so many people through COVID are so isolated. Human beings, we're social animals. We need to be connected. We need to be part of a tribe. We need to be supported. We need to have that sense of belonging. And when I see this lack of connection in my work, often in, you know, my private work in terms of counseling sessions or coaching, often people have depression because they're not connected enough into family or friends. And you would know probably better than most that suicide ideation and indeed suicide completion is heightened at Christmas time. Why? Because people don't have the connection. They're isolated, they're alone. Character, how you see life, how intrinsically you are. Are you more bouncy and more out there and, you know, engaging and loving life, or you tend to be more slow and reactive? What's your choice? Contribution. Well, you all, I mean, I'm sure you would all score yourself really highly here. Like you're making a positive contribution to your clients, to the world in some way. I say thank the Lord for the not-for-profit sector, because you are the social fabric of the world. What would we do if we didn't have a not-for-profit sector? There would be people running around, walking around the world, uncared for, unsupported, mentally unwell, no homes, living in domestic violence relationships. Thank the Lord for the not-for-profit sector. Coping. You have a wide repertoire of coping skills on which you rely. And what I said earlier, you know what they are, you're just not using them enough. If you feel as if you've got control over your life, decisions and actions, you're going to be more resilient ultimately, because you're more confident and capable. So what I want you to do as an exercise is take these 7 C's, and as an exercise, not now, but later maybe, score yourself out of 10 for each of these C's. So what do you score yourself for competence out of 10? What do you score yourself for confidence out of 10? 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. Connection, character, etc. And then what I want you to do is I want you to take the 2 lowest scores that you have given yourself, right? And then I want you to turn that into a goal with action plans. In other words, if you say that coping is 1, I've scored myself 3, my question to you is, right, so what are you going to do about increasing your repertoire of coping skills so that you can feel as if you're coping better? So you might say, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to go to a dietitian, and I'm going to go, I don't know, for a regular massage. Okay, so when and why and how? So you've got an action plan attached to that. So if these are the 7 C's of resilience, how well do you go? Okay. Now this particular vignette I want to talk to you about, because this happened in the Barcelona Olympics. And they were talking about that strength and resilience is measured in pounds, speed is measured in seconds, courage, how do you measure courage? How do you measure resilience? I think resilience is, again, what I said, somebody who just doesn't give up. They keep going no matter what adversity comes across their life. And so I'm going to show you this particular vignette, which I think is really powerful. And I think kind of really summarizes what I'm trying to show with regard to resilience and what I've been saying today. So just give me a moment whilst I change screens, please. Okay.
Do you sometimes find the fear of what could happen?
Let's get rid of him for a moment.
Nothing happen in your life?
I'd like to get rid of him.
Come down here with me, and I want to show you.
Skip the ads. Why do you always get these ads, right? Okay, now I'm just going to change the screen, people. Okay, can anybody just go to the Q&A box and just tell me that I have successfully changed the screen, please? Don't know yet. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Candy. Thanks, Sandra. Okay, so here we go. Now, remember, I want you to see this in the light of resilience. Okay, here we go.
I am down and oh, my soul so weary. When troubles come and my heart burdens thee, then I am still and wait here in silence till you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. And I am strong when I am on your shoulders. Raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be.
Right. So I'm sure some of you will have the tissues. That's all good. Okay. Tell me what you think about what I've just shown you in the Q&A box with regards to resilience. You know, we've been speaking a lot about that today. So my question is, what did you think? Any comments? What do you think, Sandra? What did you see there? Or Marie? What was the takeaway from that? Okay, so one of you is saying seems a little conflicting with the idea of self-care. On the one hand, I should be resilient enough to break through my mental and physical barriers, but I should also not expect so much of myself and push too hard. Well, I think it's a really important point that you raise. I think, if you take this particular Derek Redmond, this young man, I think, as an Olympic athlete, what you saw that day, let's say he was 25 years of age, he had been preparing for that for the last 23 years, let's say. His parents had given up so much. It costs a lot of money to get these people to the Olympics. They get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, they go to the track, they go to school, they go to the track after, school, have dinner, go back to the track. And their parents have to pick and drop and pick. And there's so much that goes into this young man's life. And when you think about it, he is really at the peak of his physical career. So I think that you make a good point. Well, if we're talking about self-care, that's one thing, but then he pushed so hard. I think we need to be very clear that people at this level of international competition or stardom, their only goal is to get through that race and obviously to win it. So I think at that moment, it was not about self-care for him. It was around finishing that dream of getting over the line. And I think the other thing was to realize that he wasn't going to live the dream that he wanted, which was to win. So Kelsey's saying illustrated some of those points around his mindset and commitment. Yes, character. And also having the support of close relationships. He set that goal and he was going to do anything it took. Now, here's the thing, right? When his hamstring broke, at that moment, in that moment, he had 3 choices as I see it. He could have sat down on the track, just put his bottom in his lane, sat down and waited for the race to go on and for it to go by. He could have walked off the track and gotten off the field because he was so overwhelmed by what had happened and so incredibly devastated. Or he could have done what he did, which was to follow the dream, which he was big, to follow his heart, to complete the goal. And no matter what, he was going to walk across that walking line. I mean, that's what I talk about resilience. He didn't win it, but I'll tell you what he did win. He won the hearts of 65,000 people, and also however many other millions was watching the race on the TV or in the news or whatever. So I think it took a lot of character, a lot of courage, a lot of resilience, a lot of self-belief, a lot of confidence to actually just keep walking. And you could see in his face how devastated he was. I mean, 25 years for him, and on some level, his dream of 25 years had gone, crushed, devastated. You saw him absolutely so upset, but then his father, his connection, came to him to help him, to support him, to get him across the line. So yeah, it's a very moving piece. I get that, but I really love to show it at the end because I think it really ultimately shows the measure of courage and resilience of somebody whose dream has just been taken away from them. I love this. Obviously, I do, as I said when I started, leadership development, and I think he was probably one of the best leaders the world has ever seen. He was grumpy. He drank too much. He smoked like a chimney. But I think he was so visionary because he was a 65-year-old prime minister at the time when the war broke out and they brought him back, right? He wasn't a young man, but I think he was so visionary in what he saw was actually happening in Europe per se. He saw what Hitler's intentions were, even though Hitler didn't say they were. He was, going to stay within the Versailles Agreement, all those kind of things. He knew. And so I think he was so visionary, and he knew that if England fell, then the rest of the world would fall. And he was determined not to surrender. And what I loved about him as well, grumpy or not, he was actually very often at the front line with his troops. He was in the trenches. He was walking through the devastation of the bombs, and he would just not surrender. And I would say that he single-handedly is the reason why Germany didn't take over the world during the Second World War. So he never surrendered, and he had incredible courage and amazing resilience. So that's a bit of my leadership tip for today. So what are you doing every day to turn things around for you, your family, your team, your organization, country? Now, this is one of the slides that goes through all of the Leading with Impact series. It's very existential as a thought, as a slide. Like, what are you doing every day to live better? Because COVID has shown us that, the world has changed. What are you going to do to move away from firefighting and exhaustion to being more in control and really living optimally? How are you going to learn through COVID that, today you may be here, but tomorrow you may not? And it's really important to start thinking about turning things around so that, our lives work for us, not against us. I often tell the story, which I haven't told any of you, but in November last year, my daughter she's 30, and she lost a 39-year-old friend of hers who she was very close to. He had a really lovely partner, beautiful 2-year-old baby, and he woke up one Monday and just died. That was it, died. He didn't know it, but he had advanced brain cancer, and I saw the devastation of my daughter, the family, his family, her family, and I was so upset about that. It really took me a long time to kind of calm down, and I had never met this man, but I just saw that he was a man who had so much to offer. He was a surfer, he was a photographer, he was just the most amazing person. And I sort of end this particular session with him as a tribute to him, because he just made me think so much about, how I live and how I want to live, and the fact that I don't want to run around off and on planes all day, every day. So are you thinking how to live optimally? And I hope, if you haven't yet, that you will now. I hope that you're taking this online session in the way that it's meant to be, which is really kind of, I guess, informative, educational, interactive, but also very, I guess, hopefully on some level, life-changing for some of you. Okay, so now's your turn. Q&As, any of you? Do any of you have any questions or comments even then about the session? Comments about maybe what you learned? Anything really, I'm here. By the way, I will be actually sending all of you, I'll ask Amy to send it today or tomorrow, is a list of questions for each of the Leading with Impact topics that you can ask yourselves afterwards. It's got the answers as well. You can do it in a team if you like, but you'd have to share these kind of webinars with your team if you like. You're very welcome to. I'm really happy to send the recording, but one thing I did want to mention is that the recording is not as good as being interactive in the moment. So try not to rely on receiving the recording, rather come online and be part of the session. I think is much better and more enjoyable, more informative. So Melanie says, I really enjoyed the session and think it was very informative. I look forward to the rest of the sessions. It's made me really question how I'm working and how I'm living now. Well, I'm glad, Melanie, I'm really glad that it's doing that, because that's what I set out to do. Yeah, to really question what you're doing. What about you, Bonnie? What did you learn today from the session? Have you got any thoughts? Have you got any thoughts, Damien? Candy, let me ask you. You see, I maybe not be able to see you as such, but I'm still asking you these questions. You've gone quiet on me, people. I've got something in the chat box, actually. Really enjoyed it from Damien. Well, that's great, Damien. I really hope that you took something away from it. Well, look, I tell you what, I'm always here. It's been the most, Marie, your health is your wealth. Really enjoyed that. Fantastic. Bonnie says, I think my thought is that I don't think I'm too stressed. Well, that's great, Bonnie. Hopefully you remain that way. Well, it's been wonderful to work with you all as usual. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you. And I really look forward to working with you on the next session. And I'm always available if you want to have a chat, catch up, you know where I am. You've all got access to me. And if you don't, well, Amy does. So thank you so much for joining me. Have a fantastic day. And remember, get your stress under control, and health is all. So take care. Speak soon.